Hello anime fan, welcome back to What If Animes 2.0. So in this video you gonna see, what if Naruto was trained by Orochimaru? This is part 1. And if you want more then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. So let's get in the video and do check out the author of the story. Things in Konohagakure no Sato were changing very quickly. For starters, the Third Shinobi War had recently been won by Konoha. They had taken their fair share of losses, but in the end they had pulled it off. Of course, the horrors of war were still very fresh in the minds of the populace. Luckily for them, the breath of fresh air they needed was at hand. The hero that had won them the war had been selected for Yondaime. Namikaze Minato received the honor from his friend and predecessor in Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage. Minato had accepted the offer graciously and became set to take office in a few short weeks. Hiruzen had made a wonderful decision in electing Minato to be his successor. Not only was he widely loved by the population, the female population more than the male for obvious reasons, but the ninja population as well. Many of them respected Minato for his fierce but kind heart and his skills in battle. Konoha became overjoyed by these words, but their good fortune had not stopped there. Not by a long shot. Konoha's villagers eventually found out that the Yondaime had a wife, much to the ire of the females, and it was none other than Uzumaki Kushina, the heiress of the Uzumaki clan. Again, Minato had become a wonderful choice. Konoha had deep ties with the Uzumaki since the Shodai Hokage had married one. Ever since then, the red swirl of the Uzumaki clan could be seen on almost all official ninja gear of Konoha. The day Minato became Hokage quickly became the best day Konoha had seen in a long time. It was true that times were hard with the recovery from the war and the loss of loved ones. What gave Konoha hope was Minato. As long as their white knight lived, then they would be able to weather any storm. Fast forward a few months to the date of October 10th. Minato and Kushina had left in a hurry, leaving a Hokage sealed note that gave Hiruzen powers of the office until Minato returned. That was the official reasoning behind the duo's disappearance. The actual reason is that Kushina had gone into labor after months of hiding from the public view to keep the child a secret. Hiruzen was all too happy to oblige. He needed something to occupy his mind. Well, something other than the obvious pain he had to endure every day. No pain hurt as much as a teacher that failed the student. And in Hiruzen's eyes he fit that perfectly. He had failed his most prized student in Orochimaru and allowed him to fall down the path of hate. Some said that he had no choice in the matter. That it was all Orochimaru's choice to become the way he was and that he shouldn't hold himself accountable. But how could he not? His students were like his children, and to fail one of them hurt beyond measure. Yes, he dearly needed something to occupy his mind. Hidden location near Konoha. Kushina lay in her bed, her hair matted thickly with sweat from the arduous labor she had just put her body through. Childbirth was no laughing matter, and the pain caused from it would be enough to kill anyone. And in some cases it did. But regardless of her physical condition, she had pushed through the exhaustion and successfully delivered her child. The child currently slept in the fair-skinned arms of one Senju Tsunade. She had been asked to oversee the birth of the baby as a personal favor from Minato and Kushina. Jiraiya wanted to be there too, but due to a complication in his spy network he was unable to attend. Speaking of Minato, the Hokage held a smiling and vibrant smile on his face. This had to be his most favorite moment in his life thus far. Being made Hokage and marrying Kushina coming in close second. Not to downplay those events, but something about his child made him feel so alive. Well, congratulations Kushina on a perfectly healthy baby. Tsunade smiled softly to the two exhausted parents. She had purposely left out the gender of the child. Kushina and Minato had elected to be surprised by the gender of the baby. And judging by the looks on their faces, Tsunade knew they wanted to know. Kushina simply held out her arms in a "give me the baby" fashion. Tsunade chuckled softly and walked over to hand the bundle over to the mother. Kushina carefully and gradually took the baby into her arms. She had never smiled so widely in her life. What she held in her arms was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her life. In her arms was a boy with the most beautiful cerulean eyes she had ever seen. They seemed to pull her in and go on forever. Much like an ocean. His skin resembled his father's in its complexion. His hair rivaled the spikiness of his father and the redness of his mother. All in all, the child resembled the parents very strongly. Tsunade smiled at the two as they took in every detail of their child. She watched their eyes hungrily devour the boy's image in its entirety. She wanted to laugh when Kushina stopped staring and furrowed her brow in deep thought. "Minato, what do you think we should name him?" Kushina asked softly. They wanted to keep the gender a secret between them. As such, they couldn't come up with a name they both liked without knowing the gender. How about Naruto?" Minato asked hopefully, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. He had read about the name in the first book Jiraiya ever published. It didn't do as good as the ones he sold now, but it held a much stronger meaning. The name came from that book. Kushina thought about it. She had read the book as well and accepted it as a good book. That being said, she didn't exactly like the idea of her baby being named after that character and by proxy become associated with Jiraiya and his books. She knew about his so-called masterpieces and hated them. "I think we should name him after the father mostly. How does Mino sound?" This caught his attention. He was honored to have his wife say that she wanted their son to be named after him. It brought a tear to his eye just thinking about the love this woman held for him. "I think that would be great." "Mino it is." He smiled at her. Not a small smile, but one so large it threatened to break his face in half if it grew any bigger. Kushina smiled back at her husband, best friend. She couldn't believe her luck in finding her soulmate. Tsunade smiled at them and turned to leave when she felt a chakra signature moving towards them. A chakra she had become very accustomed to as she had been working with it for years now. Plus, this level of power could only come from 5 people. 2 of which were in the room with her and the other 2 were busy with their own life. Which left only one option left, Orochimaru. She said quietly. The 2 distracted parents didn't hear it over their own conversation. Tsunade whirled around on her heel and opened her mouth to speak when something stopped her. Something small and sharp. Her eyes became heavy as she fell to the side, causing both parents to look over. What they saw was the snake Sannin Orochimaru standing over the prone body of his former teammate. An all too familiar smirk adorned on his lips. Minato instantly tensed up at the sight of his sensei's teammate. The same man who rivaled him for the Hokage position. "What do you want?" Minato ground out, his distaste for the Sannin extremely evident at that point. The snake seemed to get some mild enjoyment out of making Minato all tensed and worried. This would most certainly play into the plan he had. "Kukuku dear Minato. How are you? And is that a child I see?" His voice taunted Minato to test him, taunting him to give in to his base anger and strike out against him. Sadly, Minato held his ground and simply stared him down. The ice in his eyes plainly visible. "Leave now or I will kill you." It wasn't a threat in any way. It was a promise of a lifetime. One that Minato backed up by launching his killer intent at the Sannin. Orochimaru simply smiled at Minato. He had been in tighter positions than this one and his killer intent was roughly the same as his, so it held little effect to him. Instead of verbally responding, Orochimaru shot his tongue out, wrapped it around the baby, and pulled it towards him. Kushina, being as exhausted as she was, had little time to respond before the baby was yanked out of her arms. She would have lunged at the Sannin, but he held a kunai to the child's neck with a twisted grin. "Not so fast, Minato," Orochimaru said to the blonde, who attempted to throw his tri-pronged kunai at him. "Unless you want the baby to die, I suggest you do as I say." Minato slowly lowered his kunai, much to the sick pleasure of the Sannin. "Now I need some time alone here with Kushina. Minato, you will take this baby and leave or I will activate the seal on him and kill him. The seal will dissolve if you are far enough away from me." Minato was about to ask why Orochimaru wanted Kushina, but he gave him no time to think. Orochimaru lobbed the child in the air and dashed at Kushina, his fingers ablaze with chakra. Minato jumped over to the baby, grabbed it, and vanished in a yellow flash. Orochimaru slammed his palm on Kushina's belly, causing the seal to glow a violent orange. Namikaze Estate. Minato and Mino arrived in the golden flash of light that the Hokage became famous with. Luckily, he had arrived in the baby room of the house. In the heat of the moment, he had forgotten to aim for a certain room and simply launched to the house. It was pure luck he managed to land here. "Be safe, Mino. Daddy will be back soon. I promise." It happened at this moment. Right as the silence settled over the 2 boys, a roar could be heard. Not a simple roar from an animal or even one from a person. No, this one came from something much bigger and much stronger. If the chakra he was feeling was anything to go by, Minato rushed to the window and frowned deeply. Deeper than any frown he had ever worn in his life. Standing at the walls of Konoha was a beast of impressive size and power. The 9 tails of the beast swayed angrily at the village. The Kyuubi no Kitsune had come to his village. The village had met this force head-on despite the strength. Constantly balls of fire and explosive tags were launched at the Kyuubi. None of it seemed to have any effect other than pushing the beast back or just plain angering it further. Minato watched as a small blue dot moved up the red beast's fur and stopped right at the ear. A split second later the Kyuubi howled out in momentary pain. Must have been Kakashi and his Chidori. Minato thought with a small smile. That boy was something else. After roughly 5 minutes of watching, it became painfully obvious that the shinobi on the front would not be able to stop this beast on their own. He would have to do something about this beast. Sadly enough, the only thing he knew to best this beast would be to seal it away, but that would require a life and a sacrifice. He hated this, having to use his boy like this, but he is the only one that could hold this beast at bay for all of his life. He had no problems with dying, to be honest. He didn't want to, of course, but he came to terms with death after his parents had died. One thing is certain for the Hokage. Orochimaru would pay for releasing this beast upon his precious village. Meanwhile, on the front things were easily going from worse to nightmarish in a hurry. Most of the main shinobi force that had met the Kyuubi were either running low on chakra, dead, or dying quickly. The only relief they got was in the form of the Sandaime Hokage making his way with his Anbu force. Luckily a few Anbu were at the scene of action already, coordinating the efforts to the best of their ability. "Lord Hokage," the bird-faced Anbu member called out. A moment later the Sandaime arrived in his black shinobi gear and a few Anbu behind him. "Bird, what is the situation?" the aged voice of Hiruzen demanded. His veteran voice seemed to cut through all of the noise and chatter on the field. The bird paled a bit at the voice before regaining his composure to answer. "Sir, many are running out of chakra and supplies. Some are bleeding out and others are dead. Sadly, it doesn't seem like we are making any progress against it." Sarutobi took in those words grimly. They desperately needed help against this beast. Hopefully, the fourth would have a plan. For now though, "Bird, gather those with chakra and paper bombs. Tell them to wait for my signal before launching everything they have left. We have to fight this thing off until the fourth can arrive." Bird nodded wordlessly and set off to do his task. Hiruzen turned around to his small task force. "You four have the same job. Please hurry." They all vanished without a word. The Sandaime ran through a few hand seals and summoned his friend. "Enma. Oh hey Sarutobi, need me for the staff again?" the Monkey King asked. Hiruzen sighed sadly at the words but nodded nonetheless. Enma sighed and puffed into a plume of smoke. The Sandaime reached into the smoke and pulled out his famous staff. Sarutobi jumped up to a building with a grim expression adorning his face. The Kyuubi, upon sensing an extremely powerful chakra nearby, turned his head to see the person. He was sadly disappointed when it was a small and elderly human. "Who are you?" the Kyuubi inquired. Despite what most would say, the Kyuubi could be quite civilized but very quick to anger. Hiruzen was slightly taken aback by the voice of the beast but shook himself clear of it. "The Sandaime Hokage of Konoha." And with that the elderly man leapt into the air, carrying the staff with him. He raised it over his head and brought it down with thunderous force. Enma sensed his summoner's will and extended to cover the distance. The result of their tandem unison was a loud crack on the top of the Kyuubi's head. The Kyuubi growled out in pain that resonated from his head. He retaliated by bringing up one of his tails and launching it straight at the Sandaime. But he was not a Hokage for this long for nothing. Instead of being speared by the tail, Hiruzen timed his jump and landed on the tail. Quickly the old man took off running down the tail of the Kyuubi. The fox shook his tail violently, intent on knocking him off. Sarutobi jumped off the tail just before that. He looked down. He floated above the midsection of the beast. He noticed an opening and took it. The ex-Hokage front flipped in the air, bringing the staff crashing down on the Kyuubi's ribs. The beast cringed in on that side. The Kyuubi blasted his thick killer intent out from his body. It pushed the air so harshly the Sandaime was pushed back and forced to land on a tree top. That thing is impossibly strong. When I hit it I felt like I did nothing to it. And I put all my strength behind those 2 strikes. The Sandaime grimly thought to himself. Things weren't looking too good for him if he couldn't do strikes that could hurt. Maybe his ninjutsu would work. The Kyuubi turned towards the Hokage on the treetop and began running towards him. Hiruzen jumped back just as his tree became splinters, all the while performing a short set of hand seals and building chakra. Once done, he opened his mouth and called out, "Kaden, Karyu Enden." At that moment, a large and daunting dragon-shaped flame erupted from Hiruzen's mouth. The flame went no more than 5 meters before slamming its head into the Kyuubi's face, forcing the beast to stop its charge and lose sight of his target. With Hiruzen, the blast from his attack had enough force to stop the Kyuubi from advancing, but the pressure had pushed him back as well. He had no time to react as he smashed through tree branches only to land in a clearing. He quickly hopped up and looked around. Nothing was too out of the ordinary. Just some trees, the moon, the giant red fox in the background. Oh, that, and the altar with a baby in it, and Kushina standing right next to the baby with a frown on her face. Sarutobi moved over to her side quickly, curious as to why she stood next to the baby. But one look at the child proved to be enough. The child belonged to her. "Kushina, why are you here?" The redhead whirled to the elderly man, sadness locking her expression down. "Minato needs me for the seal." This made his eyes widen. The Shikifujin was nothing to mess around with, as it consumed the soul of the one who used it. "How does he PLA?" A vicious roar ripped through the quiet clearing. Both parties looked up to see a massive toad sitting atop the Kyuubi. Minato had appeared in front of them in a flash of gold, a grim expression on his face. "Lord Third," Minato started out. His voice sounded grated like nails on a chalkboard. Like the man's soul had been ripped from his very chest and he was forced to live on without it. "I need you to hold off the Kyuubi while Kushina and I prepare the seal." Hiruzen really wanted to trade places with Kushina, but their demeanor and stances at the moment suggested that they would not take no for an answer. "I will do my best." With that, he hopped away, intent on stopping the beast for the moment. If only to buy some time for them. Minato and Kushina set off to write the ink needed for the transfer and sealing of a tailed beast. Sarutobi stood alone on this fight. The Kyuubi stalked slowly towards them, no doubt sensing the chakra signatures of the 3 powerful ninja gathered. He had only one shot at this, and he would have to make it good or the beast would ruin their plans. "Kage Bushin no Jutsu," the Sandaime called out, forming one perfect clone next to him as a result. The duo had to wait just a few more seconds or this would fail greatly. The Kyuubi took on more massive step forward. It was then that the Sandaime clone, armed with half of the original's chakra, leapt onto a tree, then into the sky. Directly above the Kyuubi's head, Kaden, Goryuka no Jutsu. A large mass of dragon-shaped flames erupted from the clone's mouth. The Kyuubi looked up just in time to see the giant mass of flames smash right into the crown of his head. The force from the impact and resulting explosion alone had pushed the Kyuubi's head toward the earth at a rapid pace. The clone puffed away with a smile. The real Sandaime knew that this was the time. He gathered up what remained of his chakra and made his move. Quickly he dashed under the large beast's descending head and put his jutsu into motion. "Doden! Doryuheki!" he called out, slamming his hands onto the earth floor beneath him. Instantly a wall of solid earth rose from the ground. The wall could easily be compared to that of a mountain rising from the ground. As the wall rose, the jaw of the red fox smashed into it with full force, destroying the wall in the process. The Kyuubi lay on the ground, disoriented from the collision. Hiruzen fell to one knee and could only hope that he had bought them enough time. Seconds later, the Sandaime fell to the side and passed out from exhaustion. His elderly body simply could not keep up with these kinds of fights anymore. Few minutes later, Minato held Kushina's body close to him. She had used the Shikifujin on the Kyuubi to rip its yin part from its body. The Yondaime had used his chakra to perform the seal on the other half of the Kyuubi and seal it inside of his son, who hadn't stopped crying since. "Minato, my love, please don't let this make you bitter. Be kind and caring. Mino will need that from you. But promise me one thing?" Kushina asked between heavily labored breaths. Minato looked to be on the verge of breaking on the inside. Only Kushina's words held him together. "Anything, my love," Minato quickly responded. He knew the effects of the seal and as such knew that she didn't have long to live. Kushina smiled and leaned in close to him. "Make that bastard suffer," were her last words before going completely limp in his arms. Minato hugged her body close and began to rock back and forth, crying all the while. Even Mino had stopped crying long enough for his father to realize that he was still there. Setting Kushina down gently, he walked over and picked up his baby. He smiled at the child, the only piece of Kushina and family he had left in this world. He would protect the child and love it like no other. He owed the baby and Kushina that much. Quite the touching scene. The same slimy voice from before spoke from the shadows. Minato whirled around quickly to see who it was, holding the baby tightly to his chest for protection. Once again Orochimaru stepped from the shadows with a smirk adorning his features. "You caused this," the Yondaime hollered at the man. Orochimaru simply put a finger up to his chin with his other hand supporting his elbow. His golden eyes glowed faintly in the night. "Actually, I believe that Kyuubi did this. Well, I did release him. But oh well. It was fun while it lasted." He licked his lips evilly at that last thought. Something about his home village paying for their sins against him made him feel all warm inside. Minato gritted his teeth, dangerously narrowing his eyes at the Sannin. Orochimaru noticed him and laughed merrily at him. What could the Yondaime do in his position? Fighting him was out. "He's far too weak for that, don't worry. I'm not here to kill you. I want you to be at your best when I do that. I came to leave you with a message. I will come back, and when I do you had better be ready for a fight." The snake Sannin let his words sink in while he sunk into the ground. Minato sighed and looked back to his child. This baby would be his strength in the years to come. 12 years later, a 12-year-old boy opened his eyes for the first time of the day. He turned toward the window. A single ray of light had managed to get through and beam him directly in the eyes, thus waking him up. The boy groaned when he got out of bed. He hated mornings, but he learned to deal with them. The boy walked over to the bathroom to use it as per his daily routine. Once done, he flushed his toilet and began to wash his hands. Once done, he splashed a small amount of water onto his face to wake himself up from his hazy mind. He took the towel from the side and used it to dry his face off before looking himself in the mirror. The reflection portrayed that of an obviously young boy. His hair, jet black and long, almost like a black silk. His skin seemed paler than the moonlight on a full moon. His eyes were like silted emeralds that seemed to glow when he became angry. His eyes were adorned by a green marking on either side. His face and body frame held a good deal of width to them, making him seem and look much more human. His name was Naruto and he was an orphan. He had no family that he could have ever recalled seeing. Heck, he didn't even have a family name or anything to go by. He was simply Naruto, and for the most part he was alone. But he didn't face the world alone. No, he had a caretaker and father figure. The caretaker of Naruto was none other than the Sandaime Hokage. The old man had taken up the mantle of caring for Naruto when he had found out about the boy's true origins. Not that it was exactly difficult to do. The eye markings and silted eyes were practically a dead giveaway. Naruto walked back to his room and got dressed for the day. He didn't have much in life and his attire reflected such. He wore a black long-sleeve shirt with a sage green t-shirt over top. He wore the same sage green colored pants with blue shinobi sandals. He sighed as he put his sandals on. He wanted to join the academy and become a ninja more than anything in the world. But the civilian council strictly forbade him from joining out of fear and somehow convinced the shinobi council to agree. That hadn't stopped him in the slightest. In fact, it had spurred him on to become better and train harder. Sessions and each time overlooked some of his training. It seemed that Naruto had picked up his father's ability and natural skill. His taijutsu and ninjutsu were among the best he had seen since Orochimaru. This scared the ex-Hokage, but luckily Naruto seemed to have no interest in using his skills for the wrong reasons. Training Ground 44. Naruto had just gotten done with another grueling training exercise that consisted of running sprints up and down a rather lengthy tree. Sweat rolled down his forehead in droves. This training pushed his body to the limit each time. Slowly but surely it made him faster as well. Fighting against gravity and all. "Hello, Naruto." The elder voice of the Sandaime spoke out. Naruto turned around with his sweat rag and smiled. He always enjoyed the visits the old man gave him. Even though they were few. "Hey old man." Naruto cried out happily. The Sandaime very well may have been his father for all the stuff he taught Naruto. How goes the training? The ex-Hokage inquired. Naruto's smile vanished as he took a more serious look. Training for him was almost always a serious matter. Good for the most part. Rough but worth it. Maybe this year they will let me take the test. Naruto grumbled that last part, but Hiruzen heard him well enough to know what he said. It saddened him that the civilian council held such a strong grudge against Orochimaru that he carried it over to his son in some regards. In short, Minato hated the boy for no reason other than who his father was. Because of this, Hiruzen had trained Naruto some on the side in hopes of him being eligible to take the graduation exam. Of course, Hiruzen had Naruto hold off on the exams till he felt like he was ready. Today was that day. Naruto, I have a surprise for you. Naruto's face turned from depressed to focused in an instant. The last time he had a surprise, it happened to be his favorite jutsu. Or at least his most used jutsu. You are going to take the test today. You'll be going up against Uchiha Sasuke, this year's #1 rookie. Naruto paled at that. He had never fought another person in all of his life. Not even the villagers or ninja that used to beat on him. He figured that if he attacked back, he would only be proving them right when they called him a freak, or snake, or monster. Naruto had asked the Sandaime about those names and only received a dry and unfeeling look in return. Add on top of that, this was the #1 rookie he would have to go against. Someone who no doubt had more experience from fighting in training sessions than Naruto. Naruto, please don't worry so much. I am sure you will do fine. All you have to do is show that you know the basics and you pass. You can do this. I believe that you can. The Sandaime smiled softly at the pale boy. He may have messed up with Orochimaru, but he would not let Naruto isolate himself from others and fall down that path. Naruto's eyes began to water at the edges. He could always count on the Sandaime to make him feel better when he was feeling down in the dumps or daunted by a prospect. Now being one of those times. Naruto wiped the tears from his eyes and focused them. He would pull this off for the old man. Let's go. Naruto proclaimed with a fist pump. He could truly be a happy child if he was ever given the chance to be. Sarutobi smiled and began walking with Naruto. Close to the academy, Sarutobi smiled at his own thoughts. Having Naruto go against the Uchiha was a perfect idea. It would get Naruto a team and keep him from falling down a dark path, and would teach the Uchiha to be a bit more humble. Plus, it would sure grab the council's attention. Hopefully they would realize that they were wrong about Naruto and would lay off of him. Naruto, on the other hand, didn't smile. His hand kept going back to check his kunai strap on his leg. His palms and head could not have sweated more even if he tried. He couldn't help but be nervous. His first fight was against an Uchiha and the last on at that. Along the way, Naruto had managed to squeeze that piece of information out of Hiruzen. It certainly didn't help him in any way. All he knew about the Uchiha is that we're a strong clan with the Sharingan before most of them got wiped out by Sasuke's older brother Itachi. Naruto could only hope that Sasuke hadn't activated his Sharingan yet. Naruto was pulled from his thoughts when Hiruzen pulled on his sleeve and pointed ahead of them to a training ground where the challenge would take place. The training ground had a simple layout. Some trees to the left and right and a clearing driven between them. Just solid ground and grass in the clearing. A man with a scar on his nose and tied back brown hair greeted the two of them. Lord Third, it is an honor to see you again. He gave a slight bow to the man. The Sandaime smiled and nodded to the man. This must be Naruto? The man turned towards Naruto. His eyes appraised Naruto. Naruto held out his hand. Naruto. The man almost took a step back out of fear but shook his head, then shook the pale child's hand. Amino Iruka. The now identified Iruka spoke with a friendly voice and a smile. Naruto mentally sighed to himself. He was afraid the man would be nasty to him. But maybe the Sandaime being here had something to do with his kindness. Please follow me, Naruto, and we will go to the testing site. Iruka said flatly and began to walk. Iruka thought that this whole thing was simply a show to make the Uchiha feel better about himself. Not to mention the rumors about the council not liking the boy. A few moments later, the trio arrived at the training ground. Naruto's eyes darted around and began to appease the area, looking for anything that might give him an edge to win. What he noticed first was a boy, no taller than him, standing with his arms crossed and his eyes focused directly on Naruto. Hello, Sarutobi. The voice of Hiruzen's old teammate Danzo cut through the silence. "Hello Danzo." Hiruzen replied with equal authority in his voice. The air grew cold around the two men. The civilian council in the back shrunk back at the pressure the two of them released. Sasuke and Naruto didn't bother to look at the two men and kept their eyes locked on each other, looking for any weaknesses that the other had. Naruto's silted eyes hardened on Sasuke's onyx eyes. Both of them took a stance at the same time. Iruka sprung into action, landing in between them. "I see you both are ready. Very well. Begin." Iruka hopped back out of the way. His words drew the attention of all those watching, namely the Sandaime and the civilian council. Danzo showed up for the excuse to see how the boy progressed compared to his father at this age. The two fighters stood perfectly still. Both of them waiting for the silent signal that the earth would provide for them. Just then a strong gust of wind blew through the clearing between the two boys. Their eyes widened and they took off towards each other. Sasuke made the first move by attempting to hit Naruto in the face with a right hook. Naruto saw this coming and dropped into a squat, narrowly dodging the attack. He then threw a left towards the center of Sasuke's stomach. The dark-haired boy spun to the side. While spinning he dropped into a sweeping kick. Naruto's eyes widened when he saw Sasuke's foot come across the ground to him. He hopped slightly in the air, spun to gain momentum, and brought his foot down right on Sasuke's head. The Uchiha grunted in pain and rolled back and away from the pale-skinned Naruto. The crunch of the Uchiha's neck had made a few council members to gasp and mutter amongst themselves about Naruto going too far. Danzo smirked silently to himself. The boy had managed to stay ahead of the Uchiha the entire fight thus far and landed the first blow. Hiruzen smiled at the scene. Naruto was doing great and showing the Uchiha a worthwhile fight. The two had engaged in a hand-to-hand fight again. Sasuke was determined to prove that he could best Naruto. The pale boy blocked or straight-up dodged all of Sasuke's punches and kicks. It wasn't until Sasuke missed an uppercut that Naruto planted his fist into his face and sent him sailing. Naruto watched Sasuke fly and noticed his body had started shaking. He had never felt anything like this feeling. The feeling of fighting and winning felt far too good for him. He wanted more of it. He wanted the Uchiha to feel his rage that he kept bottled up for so long. Sasuke stood up and decided that he had been hit one time too many and went to land the finishing blow. Running through head seals, the Uchiha were famous for he sucked in a big gulp of air. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. And Sasuke let the huge ball of flame fly through the air and at Naruto with hurtling speed. Naruto couldn't really dodge it seeing its size, but that's when a plan entered his head. A plan to win. Doden. Doryuheki. Naruto called out and slammed his hands on the ground. The earth rose up to meet the ball of fire dead on. The fireball hit and instantly became extinguished against the hard surface, sending smoke everywhere and blocking vision. From the smoke, Naruto came running right at Sasuke. The raven-haired boy, still breathing slightly heavy from the jutsu he just launched, brought his defense up. Naruto brought his knee up for a gut shot. Sasuke launched his fist straight through Naruto's head. Literally straight through. Sasuke's eyes widened when he realized the Naruto he was fighting was a clone. Suddenly the real Naruto appeared behind Sasuke, jabbing a kunai into his knee. Sasuke dropped to his injured knee with a grunt. Naruto swung his leg and cracked it across the side of Sasuke's face. The Uchiha lay face down in the ground, unconscious from the kick. Naruto pulled his kunai out of the boy's leg. For some reason he couldn't stop himself from thinking that at any moment the Uchiha would wake up and try to kill him. Naruto felt his blood scream for the death of the person who had tried to harm him. And at the moment, he wasn't sure he could stop himself from killing the Uchiha. His bloodlust had just become too great and needed to be satisfied. Luckily Hiruzen noticed the look and jumped in to stop him. Very good Naruto, but that's enough. Now put the kunai away. Naruto growled lowly at the Sandaime, sounding an awful lot like his Sannin father. You're kidding, right? This piece of trash is the rookie of the year? Pathetic if you ask me. It seems Konoha needs me more than I thought. And with that Naruto hopped away from the scene. Hiruzen sighed to himself. Orochimaru had been the same way when he first fought a worthwhile opponent. It would seem Naruto picked that up too. Very good. Very impressive for a genin. I haven't seen one so skilled since, well, Orochimaru. Danzo spoke with a mockingly happy tone. Though it was true, Orochimaru had been one hell of a genin in his time. The civilian council murmured amongst themselves, talking about how the son of the snake Sannin handily defeated the last Uchiha. It seemed to them that they had wasted their efforts on the wrong child prodigy. They decided that they would allow Naruto to join a team. Naruto's house. Naruto walked in through the front door and sighed. He was coming down from his high of fighting the Uchiha and was not happy about it. He loved the feeling of fighting and wanted to do it all the time if it meant he would never have to been dead again. Fighting made him feel alive. He also pondered what it would feel like to kill someone. Stabbing the Uchiha had brought a rush blasting through his system. He could not imagine what killing someone would make him feel like. He shuddered slightly at the thought, a twisted grin covering over his face. Naruto quickly shook his head. These thoughts were wrong and the Sandaime would be disappointed in him for even thinking like that. Naruto hung his head when he thought about the old man. Hiruzen would no doubt be very upset with him for acting the way he did during the fight and after. With a heavy sigh he walked into his room and plopped down on his bed. A small and annoying thought kept into his head while his thoughts raged about. This is only the beginning. Amino Iruka walked into his classroom with a sense of uneasiness about him. He arrived at his class roughly 5 minutes late because he had talked to the Sandaime about Naruto. The boy had interested him and he wanted to learn more about him. However, what he learned was not what he had expected. He found out that Naruto is the son of Orochimaru, the snake Sannin of Konoha. Or rather ex-Konoha ninja, but that didn't really matter. The man could easily crush almost any ninja out there with little to no effort at all. And the fact that he had bore a child with his same talent level scared Iruka. Of course the Sandaime assured Iruka that Naruto was nothing like his father and would never fall prey to the same influences as Orochimaru had. That still didn't stop Iruka from being wary of the child. He trusted the ex-Hokage, not the son of one of the most dangerous men alive. In fact, the class must have felt the same thing. Because when Iruka snapped out of his thoughts to begin assigning teams he heard no noise. Iruka blinked at the sudden phenomenon. The whole class was never ever this silent. Even the Haruno and Yamanaka were dead silent. As Iruka watched the class he noticed that their eyes seemed to be stealing glances at the pale-skinned Naruto. Not that the boy paid them any attention, however. He stared straight at the board and waited for his team to be announced. A rather pleased smile on his pale face. Iruka opened his mouth to begin speaking when Uchiha Sasuke opened up the door. He walked into the class with a slight hobble to his leg from the previous day's actives. His fan club immediately began an uproar upon seeing their beloved Sasuke hurt or injured in any way, shape or form. Oh poor Sasuke. The pink-haired Sakura called out. Only Kami knows how she got her voice to become so high and so annoying. Hearing the screeching voice of his loudest fangirl, Sasuke cringed. Coming up quickly behind her was the blonde-haired Yamanaka heiress. Move forehead. Sasuke needs someone pretty to look at to feel better. The Yamanaka shoved Haruno out of the way and onto her backside. She stopped for a moment to hold a triumphant smirk over her rival before turning back to their mutual point of interest. Oh Sasuke. How on earth did you get hurt? Yamanaka asked quietly, afraid her question might have offended him in some way. Sasuke just grunted and narrowed his eyes. The platinum blonde followed his eyes to see where they landed. She held back a gasp when his eyes landed on the newest kid in the room. Naruto turned his head when he felt a strong glare attack him. Seeing that it was only Sasuke, he met and matched his glare with one of his own. The whole room grew silent and watched the two boys stare each other down. Iruka sat still, silently hoping that the two wouldn't break out into a fight again. Sakura was contemplating whether or not to smash Naruto's face in for hurting her precious Sasuke. Ino, the Yamanaka, stared with her mouth agape. This was the kid that had managed to best Sasuke? Mizuki, Iruka's teaching helper, wore perhaps the best face of surprise. This boy looked exactly like his master. Even his glare looked just like Orochimaru's glare. Not that anyone knew who Mizuki associated with anyway. He was a rather shady person. Eventually Sasuke grunted and hobbled up to his seat. By the time the fan club had recovered from their shock, their idol had already taken his seat. The rest of the girls rushed over to get the one empty seat next to Sasuke. Naruto watched on with mild amusement as the fan group migrated over to the only seat next to the Uchiha heir. Naruto could care less about that though. He was more excited to see which team he would be put on and who would be his teammates. Soon Iruka worked up that nerve to speak again, hoping that this time there would be no menacing showdown between students. Right. Anyway, from this day forth you are all shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato. I expect each and every one of you to remember what I have taught you and remember the will of fire. Remember this and you will do fine in this life. Iruka waited while the resounding roar of the crowd eventually died down. He could hear many cries of victory and promises to uphold the will of fire, but these aren't what interested him. What interested him was Naruto. The boy had not joined in on any of the celebrations or anything. He just stared blankly at the wall, focused on getting his team. Quiet down now. Iruka held up a tanned hand to silence the children. It took them a few more moments and cold glares from the two teachers, but they did settle down. Now we will be assigning your teams to you as given to us by the Hokage. After that your sensei will meet you here in about an hour, so you have some time to get to know your new team. A round of nods from the students, except a few kids, told Iruka it was time to get on with the show. Each kid wanted to see their team. Each wanted to know who they would be spending a great deal of time with. Their excitements began to fill the air and made it thick with anticipation. Iruka went through the first 6 teams. Each time he called out a team, the female member would let out a whine while the boys seemed unaffected but happy regardless. The biggest bomb when it came to the teams was Team 7. Team 7 will be composed of Uchiha Sasuke. This caught the attention of everyone in the room. Even Naruto looked to see who would be paired with the last Uchiha. Haruno Sakura. A vicious screech of victory echoed throughout the room. And Inuzuka Kiba, your Jonin sensei will be Hitaki Kakashi. Iruka moved over to the Team 8 slot and began writing. Now for Team 8, the room grew silent again. Only a few students remained to be put on teams, and now that the Uchiha had been put on a team, they wanted to see who the pale kid would go with. First up is Aburame Shino. The bug users simply nodded in acceptance of the situation. Most of the other students cringed at the name. Bugs alone were creepy enough. But bugs that crawled out of human skin? Most certainly shudder-worthy. Hyuga Hinata. The Hyuga heir blushed when her name was called. Though on the inside she was a little sad. She had wished to be paired with Mino, but his father, the Yondaime, personally oversaw his training. The students held their breath again. The last member always seemed to be the most interesting as it completed the group. And lastly, Naruto. Your sensei will be Yuichi Kurenai. The room went dead silent, but that was to be expected. No one knew Naruto. Hell, no one had even seen Naruto until now. Naruto smirked to himself. He loved that no one knew anything about him. It made him an unpredictable ninja, and that would save his life when he needed it. He knew about the Hyuga from Hiruzen, holders of the famous Byakugan and gentle fist-fighting style. Then the Aburame, wielder of the chakra-draining insects. Talented bunch they were. He had been so absorbed in his own thoughts that he hadn't heard the other teams called, nor did he see the other teams file out of the room to meet and greet each other. Naruto blinked and looked around to see his two teammates next to each other but not talking. He sighed to himself and walked over to them. Hello you two. My name is Naruto. It is nice to meet you. He gave them a slight bow. The Hyuga blushed and the Aburame nodded. He took this as a good sign and sat down next to Hinata. Normally he would be okay with the silence, but the Sandaime had urged him to build bonds with his teammates. Silently cursing the old man, he sucked in a breath. Would you two like to go outside and talk? I brought snacks for all of us. This way we can get to know each other. What do you say? He said with a slight smile. The duo looked at each other, then back to the pale kid and nodded. Together the three of them left and walked outside. Once outside, the group found an empty table and sat down on it. Naruto distributed some rice balls among the group with a small, albeit forced, smile. He truly felt awkward in these types of situations because he had very little experience when it came to people who didn't hate him. Soon the silence became far too awkward for Naruto to handle. He decided that he would go first. Well, I guess I can go first. My name is Naruto. I like science and training. I dislike people who judge others without knowing them first. My dream is to make my grandfather happy by becoming a great ninja. Naruto watched the two swallow the information he gave them. He really didn't have much to say about himself that he hadn't already. He had no history to go over. No parents to talk about. Only the Sandame. The Hyuga nodded and went to twiddling her fingers. Shino gave no apparent look, only a very slight nod in return. My name is Aburame Shino, as you have been informed. I am the heir to the Aburame clan and wish to be a great leader for the clan. I like different species of insects. I dislike those who kill bugs for no reason other than they are different looking, or those that judge others without prior knowledge. Naruto smiled at the boy. He had strong convictions, plus he disliked when people judged others. My name is Hyuga Hinata. I am the heiress to the Hyuga C clan. I like cinnamon buns and CC confidence. I dislike hate and separations. My dream is to be noticed by a certain someone. Naruto smirked to himself. She left out that she was painfully shy, but she seemed nice enough. Again Shino only gave the briefest of nods towards the girl. The kids were about to continue talking about each other when a swirl of leaves arrived. Out of the swirl a rather tall woman with long black hair and ruby-red eyes appeared. Her white and red outfit caught Naruto's eye as it was not the normal attire for a jonin to wear. Nice to see that my cute genin are getting to know each other already. The woman smiled. Hinata suspected that this may be Kurenai due to her timely appearance and suggestion that they were her cute little genin. You must be Kurenai-sensei. The ever-dull voice of Shino rang out. The woman turned to him and smiled softly at him. That's correct. I will tell you more but not here. Meet me at Training Ground 8 in 10 minutes. Another swirl of leaves came by and once again the genin were all alone. Each of them shared a look before dashing off to go meet their sensei. With Kurenai at Training Ground 8. The ruby-eyed Kurenai stood in the center of her training ground silently. She was thinking of the past week's events. As customary, she and all the other jonin had found out their teams and their roles at the same so that they all could prepare and teach these kids properly. Kurenai could not be sure what to think of her team though. She had the Hyuga heiress. A girl she had longed to help out and be there forever since she had found out about her situation. Her home life was less than savory and had caused her a great deal of pain and suffering. And it was all because she wasn't the daughter those damned council members had wanted. Next up was the Aburame heir, Shino. In truth she had no idea what to think of him and his family. She held zero ill will towards them of course. They were splendid ninja and very good tacticians when it came to fighting and usage of their bugs. She just did not know how to approach or deal with Shino. Though she imagined that he would be very easy and respectful to get along with and teach. Her greatest challenge came in the form of her last student. Naruto, the son of the accursed snake Sannin of Konoha. She actually knew less about Naruto than the Aburame boy. Not that much about him could be known. She had heard nothing about this boy until she was assigned him. It wasn't really fair to either of them. What was worse was how Anko had felt about the situation. Seeing as how she became branded by the snake Sannin when she was a kid. Anko had been one of the first to actually find out about Naruto when he was younger. She didn't know how to feel about him but she felt a special link to the boy. Both had been abandoned by Orochimaru. Soon Kurenai heard the shuffle of rushing feet coming towards her. She opened her eyes to see her three genin keeled over and breathing harshly. Well, Shino and Hinata were. Naruto was breathing heavy but he looked as though he could run some more if he needed to. At least now she knew which ones were in good shape and which weren't. Glad to see you all made it in time. She smiled again at the group who had mostly recovered. Now you all may have passed the genin exam but that is more or less just a qualifying test for the real test. Since we will be a tracking team that is what our test will be over. You have exactly 2 hours to find my trail, follow it without me knowing, and catch me. Good luck. Again the blasted wind picked up and Kurenai was once again gone from all sight and sound. Shino was the first to act and sent a bug over to where she was standing. The small shift in his posture let Hinata know that something was wrong. Silently the girl ran through a few signs and activated her eyes. She frowned when the world around her became much more visible. Kurenai-sensei has left no trail at all. At least none that my bugs can detect. Shino stated flatly, though that was to be expected. She is a jonin after all. I can't find her chakra source with my eyes anywhere near us. Hinata meekly threw out, again to be expected. Naruto walked up to where she was standing and took a knee at the spot. The Sandaime had taught him how to hunt for people before. If only a little bit. And from her footprint he could honestly say, I have no clue where she went. Naruto admitted sheepishly. Hinata and Shino's sweat dropped at the admission. He sighed and stood up and turned to his new team. I suggest we search this area first. Maybe she made it easy on us? He asked with a smile and shrug of his shoulders. Wordlessly the group took off into the forest surrounding the clearing and began to search for any clue their sensei might have left behind for them to find. They hopped from tree to tree and branch to branch, each of them looking around with their special abilities. Shino spread his bugs all throughout the forest and had them looking for anything that could relate to Kurenai's scent. Hinata used her eyes to ferret out any kind of lingering chakra that may have been left. Naruto used what tracking skills he had to find if anything looked out of place or broken that may have indicated that she had passed through here. It actually took them several laps around the training ground before anything was found. Naruto broke formation and landed next to a twig that had been freshly broken by the looks of it. He picked up an end of the broken stick and held it in the light. The wood was a light brown, something more akin to a tan. She's been through here. Both Shino and Hinata shared a look when they stopped on the branch above him. Perhaps the boy had gone crazy from not finding anything and suffered from wishful thinking. How can you be certain? Shino drawled out above Naruto. The boy turned around and looked at his teammate, his green silted eyes shining in the light that reflected from them. Hinata swallowed slightly at the strange eyes, not that she had any ground to stand on in that regard. This twig was just broken. The wood is not stained or darkened. It is compressed, meaning that someone stepped on it to force it to break. Shino mulled that over in his head. It did make sense, but why would she be all the way out here? And where did she teleport to? Naruto took off in the direction of the starting location with zeal. Shino and Hinata followed, interested in what he may be onto. When Naruto arrived at the spot he frowned. They had missed something. There were footprints leading from the spot into the forest. It figures we didn't see it. We were looking for chakra and not actual tracks. He followed the trail with his eyes. That would make sense. Shino added in and followed Naruto as he walked into the forest. I'm sorry. Hinata looked down ashamed. She should have been able to see those, she thought. Her father would be very upset with her if he found out that they had missed such an obvious clue. Naruto looked back with a small smile, barely noticeable by anyone without perfect eyes. Don't beat yourself up over it, Hinata, was all he said before facing front. Hinata blinked at him. It wasn't a compliment but more of a command. His voice wasn't its usual bored tone but had the slightest hint of emotion to it. Naruto smirked to himself. Maybe this making bonds thing would be easier than he thought it would. All it would take is a smile and not yell at them when they made a mistake. Kinda like the old man did with him. He took off into the forest and followed the tracks with haste. Soon the three of them were bearing down upon her. The tracks became fresher and fresher the faster they went. It wasn't long until the two others called out their respective traits and found her. Dead ahead. Hinata called out, the veins on the side of her head pushed to their limit with the influx of chakra. Her scent is near. Shino stated just loud enough to be heard by his teammates. Naruto nodded and began looking around. For a while the tracks ran dead and he could see nothing that may point him in the right direction. The three of them stopped moving on a branch. Each of them had a frown on their faces. They had indeed found her. All three of her, in fact. It's not a genjutsu. Those are three real copies of her. Shino frowned deeper. He had heard of something like this but hadn't expected it to be used on him. Shino is right. Hinata added. Her eyes could see their chakra network, if only barely, and each of them had the same chakra and the same amount. If it was a clone she would have seen through that and could have pointed out the real one. Three looked to each other. We can't split up, Naruto said, earning incredulous looks in return. He sighed, pinching his nose bridge in response. Think about it. We are genin. We would have slim to none chance of fighting her as a 3-on-1. In what universe could we hold our own on a 1-on-1? He finished gruffly. Shino and Hinata could see the logic in that. Even if the copies were only a third of her power, it would still be more than enough to take all of them out without a second glance. Shino moved closer so as to speak quieter. So then what do we do? Hinata nodded in agreement and moved closer, despite her awkwardness. Naruto lowered his head and thought. He had a good brain when it came to these kinds of things, figuring out how to do things, that is. It took him a few moments, but he had come up with a simple solution. Naruto knelt and motioned for the others to do the same. Shino, I need your bugs to silently latch onto all three of them and begin to drain their chakra. If they are clones, then eventually they will disperse. Shino nodded and sent the command to his bugs. Hinata, in the meantime, I need you to watch with your Byakugan to see which chakra network is least affected by the bugs. That will be our Kurenai-sensei. Hinata did as she was told. Naruto, Hinata, and Shino all stood and waited for the work to be done. It was hard enough to coordinate with the bugs while they were away from the body, but getting them all in place and in action took some time and concentration on Shino's part. Eventually, though, the bugs did move into position and began their task. Hinata watched careful at the systems of each of the copies. Her eyes glared harshly at each body, waiting for it to waver in any way. It took a second or so, but soon she saw Kurenai, over there. She whispered and pointed toward the Kurenai furthest from them. The group wordlessly took off and began their hunt of their sensei. Kurenai knew that her game had been played and that they were now on her trail. She turned to run but was surprised when a large wall of earth rose up in front of her. Soon Naruto landed atop the wall with a victorious smirk. Why are you so happy? A little wall can't stop me, Kurenai added. Naruto's smirk only grew wider. True, but what of the bugs? You may be able to outrun all of us, but in the end we would find you. What if I just crushed them? Shino frowned at his sensei's words. He decided to step up and make his presence known. That would be your only option, Kurenai-sensei. Only issue is that they are on your skin, on your torso and legs. You would have to remove your clothes. Of course this would happen after you got away. You could go to your house and change in peace, but now I have your scent. My insects could track you all over Konoha. Add to that Hinata and her eyes. Shino finished and pushed his glasses back up to his face. Kurenai resisted the urge to smirk in pride of her students. They had thought some of this through and landed in a very viable path that she would take. She would most certainly not be stripping in public, so her home would have to do. They could follow her in the meantime and catch her again. Then there was Hinata. Any genjutsu she used would be seen through. Not to mention Naruto. Despite his appearance, the boy knew a thing or two about avoiding or finding people and predicting the paths of people. A series of beatings had taught him that. She had little doubt he would not rest until he caught her. Kurenai did the only thing she could at this time, with all of her exits cut off. She relaxed and began clapping. Very good, all three of you. I am glad that you managed to keep faith and find me. I am a little disappointed that you all could not see through the illusion in the beginning, but that is expected. Shino, I am very pleased with your use of your companions. Due to your efforts you managed to keep a constant sensor in this area and were ready for anything that may move through here. If it weren't for you, then they may not have found out which was the real me. Shino nodded at his sensei's words, a slight pleased buzzing coming from his body. Kurenai turned to Hinata. Hinata, I am proud of the way you handled yourself during this session. You followed your teammates and helped when you could. You helped point them in the right direction every time they needed it. On top of it all, it was thanks to you that the others knew which was me and could take action before I vanished again. Hinata's face reddened to something similar to a tomato. Kurenai turned to Naruto, who had just descended his wall of earth to land in between his teammates. And last but not least, Naruto. Good job on not being overly reliant on any special traits. You were able to point out a physical trail when no other trails were visible due to my concealment technique. Thanks to your simple tracking methods, you were able to give hope and chance to the group and keep them going. Also, your planning with your teammates is a wonderful trait to have, and you managed to cut off my escape route with your jutsu. Kurenai finished with a smile. Naruto beamed with pride at being praised. He rarely got praised and enjoyed every second of it when it happened. Of course I could have just taken you all down anyway. Kurenai mused to herself, causing the three to frown and pale. But that wasn't the point. Go home and rest. Tomorrow we start training as Team 8. She smiled softly and, once again, vanished away in a swirl of leaves. Naruto silently made a promise to himself to learn that jutsu and use it all the time. Good teamwork. I will see you both tomorrow, Shino said as he turned and left the clearing. Same, Naruto said lazily, making his way back to village, then his home. Hinata simply blushed at the compliment from her teammate and hastily made her way home to her dad to share the news. In the trees above Team 8. Kurenai appeared on a tree branch right next to another body. Her and the person next to her watched as the three genin left the woods. Kurenai looked over to see a tan face stuck in a frowning position. This slightly worried Kurenai. What's wrong? The ruby-eyed genjutsu mistress asked her companion. Nothing. That's the problem. He is exactly like his father. Smart, cunning, a leader. The person trailed off. Anko. Kurenai said softly. Anko tore her vision off of the retreating form of Naruto to look at her friend. He isn't Orochimaru. He isn't anything like his father in terms of personality. Anko frowned, some of her purple hair falling over her face and chocolate-colored eyes. Yet you mean? Remember, Orochimaru was one of us for the longest time. Just wait. Anko spoke darkly. Kurenai frowned deeply at her. Couldn't she see past that? He is the son and not the man himself. Orochimaru deserved the hate, not this innocent little boy who has to pay for the sins of his father. Anko, don't be like that. You two are connected. Anko looked up in confusion at her friend. Kurenai smiled softly in return. Think about it, Anko. Both of you were abandoned by Orochimaru and are forced to bear his sins. You and that little boy both. Anko frowned the more she thought about it. Kurenai was right. She was always right after all. Her and Naruto suffered from a similar past involving the same man. That much was certain. Anko just could not shake the hate she had for the boy at the moment. He looked way too much like his father for her to get along with him now. Wordlessly, Anko hopped down from the tree branch and vanished away from sight. Kurenai watched her friend run away with a sigh. Anko always had a hard time dealing with her emotions, and it looks like this event brought up some very unwanted ones. Either way, Kurenai had to get back to her house. She had a training regime to plan. With Naruto, if there was one thing that Naruto couldn't stand, it would be walking down the street and getting glared at. Especially when he had no clue what he had done to earn such hate from everyone. Even the little kids glared at him. The Sandaime told him not to worry about it, but this was quickly becoming too much for him to handle. He had to figure out the reason today. Even if he didn't like the answer, he had to do it. Setting his face in a fixture of renewed vigor, Naruto took off down the streets that lead to his house. As he went by, he couldn't help but frown at the condition of the houses. Every few blocks the housing conditions dropped. Pretty soon Naruto entered the worst part of Konoha and his home, the slums. Now it wasn't anything like one may think. These houses still existed in Konoha and as such had to be upheld to a certain degree. At least on the outside. From the outside, all the houses looked good enough to be able to support a person to two. Seemingly a good place to live. It's when someone looked underneath that all sorts of problems arose. This area just so happened to house most of the social outcasts and less desirable of society. Many disgraced shinobi and alcoholics live here. Then there was Naruto. He lived all the way in the back, at the very edge of Konoha. Completely isolated from human contact and any signs of life. In fact, if someone were trying to find him and were not told of where he lived, they would never find him. Naruto hated living out here, but it worked for now, so he would accept it. When Naruto got into his home, he was a touch surprised. Sitting in his living room was the Sandaime. While him being in Naruto's house wasn't all that strange, it was the timing that surprised him a bit. Normally the old man would stop at least once a week, and since he had just seen him not 2 days ago, it was odd. But Naruto didn't mind. He had a few questions that he wanted answers to, and he knew that Hiruzen knew the answers. "Hello Naruto. How did your day go?" the elderly man asked with a smile. Naruto frowned slightly before letting a short sigh leave his lips. No use in blowing his question off. "It went good. I met my team and we passed our test," Naruto said, a slight tinge of excitement and joy in his voice. "Tomorrow we start training as a team." Sarutobi smiled. He remembered his own days with training as a team and all the joyful experiences it brought. He hoped it would affect Naruto the same way. "Do you like your team?" Hiruzen asked plainly. Naruto put a finger to his chin in mock thought before answering. "Well, Shino is kinda quiet but extremely useful with his insect things. Hinata is really shy, but her eyes can see almost anything and everything. Kinda wish I had something like that," Naruto sheepishly admitted. Sarutobi smiled but had other thoughts behind the smile. To the ex-Hokage, it seemed Naruto saw people as things to be used. A side effect of his childhood for sure. That, and he hadn't had a lot of human contact before in his life. Team 8 would be just what was needed for him to grow. Well, sounds like you have a good team. What of your sensei, Kurenai-sensei? She's okay, I guess. Really smart and kind. She had red eyes kinda like the Uchiha do, but without those little black dots. And she is really good at hiding. He added emphasis to the last part. She had impressed him with how she had been able to hide that whole time and never even make a sound. Well, she is a Jonin for a reason, Naruto. The old man laughed and Naruto chuckled along with him before his face took a more serious look upon it. Old man. Why do the people look at me with hate? The boy asked in complete seriousness with a face so cold it could freeze the whole house if he wanted it to. Hiruzen opened his mouth to protest but found that he lacked the will to deny the boy. Naruto, know that I can't outright tell you the truth. The Hokage had made it a law that I couldn't tell you, but I can make you a deal. Naruto's eyes were the picture of concentration as the Sandaime spoke. The law states I can't tell you until you become a Chunin. But I will let you know if you make it to the second round of the exams. Naruto frowned. The exams are still several months away. You are really going to force me to wait that long? He waited a few moments and nothing but silence followed after showing that the Sandaime would not spill a single word. Can you at least tell me something about them? My family, I mean. Hiruzen thought about. No harm could come from giving Naruto some peace of mind about his family. Naruto, your father was a wonderful shinobi. A genius of intellect and a prodigy with ninjutsu. Naruto frowned after hearing that. Was? Does that mean he is dead? The pale, green silted-eyed boy asked. Hiruzen stood up and made his way to the door before turning around with a smile. I never said that. Maybe you will meet him one day. Hiruzen said before shutting the door. Naruto couldn't fight off the huge grin that threatened to split his face at those words. His father had set an example of excellence for him to compete against and Naruto would be damned to lose. He would make his shinobi father proud and nothing, and he meant nothing, would be getting in his way. Though I hope you never do. Hiruzen thought sadly as he walked away. If those two ever did meet, then Sarutobi ran the risk of Naruto falling down the same path. Orochimaru could be one very persuasive person when he wanted to be. And Naruto was still a very impressionable child who needed a parent figure in his life. And God knows that this world could not handle another Orochimaru. Not to mention a younger, more intelligent one. Please God, never let them meet, for I fear it would spell destruction for many lives. Thanks for watching, guys.